Hey everyone, it's Phil Hall of Westfair Communications, and thanks for joining us on this week's video conversation. And it promises to be a very interesting conversation because my guest is Tina Clements. She's Vice President at RPC, the Retail Performance Company. Tina, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
I don't know how much of an honor it's going to be by the time it's over, but we'll revisit that afterwards. But you know, you actually got this off on a positive note, and I like that because we're going to be discussing encouraging people to reach their fullest within the workforce. And in a lot of workforces, particularly after the past few months with all that's been going on, there hasn't been a lot of positivity in there. How are you able to get a positive message across without coming as seeming insincere or maybe too consultancy-like?
That is it's a great question and a super hard question. And I think we can answer it two ways. One is in the form of advice. And the biggest key in this situation is to be transparent and just don't BS your people. At this point, we are in a very real situation for which everyone, when left to their own devices, will go off and make up stories.
Yeah.
Don't give your people the opportunity to do that, and bring them, even if it's over communication. Over communication is a skill that nobody really develops anymore. And to bring people together again remotely and say, hey team, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I'm telling you that. And the second I do know, I will get back with you and I'll let you know. So full transparency, uber communication, and be vulnerable about it. Be okay to say, gang, I don't know, and I'm not okay with that, but I'm okay to not be okay right now. So hopefully that answers your question, Phil, because it's not easy. It's not an easy skill set whatsoever to lean into that.
Well, it's difficult enough doing it in person when you have a whole room full of people, but what about doing it here on Zoom? We're using this platform now. How do you get it across, or is it easier perhaps to be doing it looking at a camera as opposed to looking at a person in front of you?
I don't know anybody who would say this forum is easier to get across any type of feedback, performance feedback, constructive feedback, even positive feedback, because the kinetic energy of human to human, there's something to be said for that, right? So this lends itself to a challenge. However, it can be done, and quite frankly, it has to be done. So number one, we have to, as leaders, continue to give feedback to our people with consistency and, quite frankly, constantly as it comes to our attention, especially now because everyone is so disconnected and there is just this lack of human contact. So the key is to not stray from the rules that you have developed for one-on-one the physical interaction and giving the feedback. You have to do the exact same thing via remote. Set expectations and set the timeline and even an agenda if necessary. These are the things that I want to talk to you about today. Don't let things linger. That's, oh my goodness, as leaders, you know what, leaders today, humans are terrified of conflict, terrified. And a really amazing leader has to be able to jump into the deep end of conflict and swim around until their fingers get pruny, because conflict is human and we are humans and we're fallible. And conflict for a leader could be having to give constructive feedback. Hey, can we have a couple of minutes? So I saw that you were doing X, and I don't want the perception, you've been late to all of the last remote meetings. I don't want the perception of you is that you are a lazy person. Let's talk about that. How can I help you to show up on time? Because we need to work, whatever it is. It's hard, Phil, but we need to lean into it and be immediate and consistent, regardless if it has to be through this box with this little camera attached to it.
Not everybody's a good communicator, though, and I've actually found a lot of people who rise through the corporate ranks are not very articulate. How do you teach somebody to have the proper communication skills needed to be a leader in the workforce?
I've found that feedback, it's funny that we keep circling around this topic of feedback, but you have to give them feedback. They don't know. Some people, orating and articulating is a skill that you have to practice via getting immediate feedback from others. Sometimes the feedback is just in facial expressions. You say something in a certain way and you get that, but you also have to be, that's it. That's it. Some of your viewers might be doing that right now, right? But but right. And so you have to have some self-awareness. Not everyone is. So we have to be able to give feedback to to leaders and communicators on, hey, that really worked. Or can I just give you a little feedback right now? That made me feel put down, or I felt judged by how you were saying that. And so if we're not getting it, we as leaders need to ask for it. I continue to do that. Hey team, how did I explain that? Did that come off okay for everyone? Did what I say? No, Tina, actually that pissed me off. Thank you very much. Let me see if I can rephrase that. But if you're not getting it, then the advice I would give is to ask for it. Absolutely.
What about the flip side? Say you have a leader who is very articulate and can get her point across, but that person's dealing with a bunch of people who just sit there like clumps of clay and don't offer any ideas or any feedback or any sign of life during a meeting. How do you inspire people to come up to your level?
That is another hard question, but a really good question. It is not a leader's responsibility to make people happy. It is, however, a leader's responsibility to create an environment where people can thrive, where people want to be able to contribute. And so the first thing is for the leader to put the mirror up to him or herself and say, okay, how am I leading? And what kind of environment am I creating? And a way to do that is to talk independently to each of their people and to ask, so how am I doing? Which is a form of conflict. This brings us back to the conversation that we had a couple of minutes ago. People are terrified of conflict because if I ask, I might get the answer and I might not like the answer. However, when we lean into that and we're vulnerable, we will get it. People will tell you what you could be doing better and what's making them afraid and whatnot. And then you can actually shift and do something about it. Now, sometimes people just don't want to. That's the end of the story. And then you have to figure out the why. Is it because they're just, maybe that's who they are and they're shy and this, and you have to create a different environment for that human so they can feel safe to share. Or maybe it's a performance issue. And that is, again, a form of conflict where a leader still has to have that one-on-one conversation and diagnose and find out what's really going on and what can be done.
But what if you're in the workforce and you're trying to deal with your manager or company president, and they're inconsistent in how they conduct things? For example, I've worked at 2 different publishing companies where I uncovered plagiarism by a colleague of mine and brought it to the head of the company, and nothing was done.
Oh, that's frustrating. That must have been really frustrating.
Very frustrating. But then the message I'm getting is that my concerns about what's best for the company are being ignored. And the person actually 2 people who plagiarized got away with it.
Right. So the question I would ask you, figuratively speaking, because I'm not going to coach you on this video recorded call, but if I was working in human resources in the performance management arena and somebody was to come with me to me as something like that, the question that I would ask is then what kind of value rub are you getting right now? Because now there are always 5 choices that a human can make when confronted with a conflict. And for you in that moment, that's a conflict. And the conflict is, do I stay at a company that has completely different set of values than I do? Because it was wrong. What those people did was theft. What they did was wrong. They broke the rules, but the leader said, that's okay. So there's nothing you can do to change that, it sounded like. But what choice you can then make is, okay, so am I okay with that? And so then you have to go through, will I accept it? Which means you'll never think about it again and then move on with your life. Will I try to change it? Which means try to shift the regime and maybe bring in a lawyer, take some action, right? You can change your perspective around it and say, maybe what they did was okay. Maybe what they did is okay, and start to really think of it from their perspective and make change. You can leave it, which is I'm out, because the value rub is so intense. And the 5th choice is to remain a victim to it. And what many employees do when they're in a situation where they feel like they have zero control is they stay in it, and it becomes a part of their mindset, and they can't stop thinking about it, and they blame all the time, and they talk about it. Well, what happens is that situation has now taken up space in a person's mind. They've rented space, and they're living in there. And that's what this person, this employee, they can't get past. And a lot of people are they have the victim mentality in their mindset, but it's a choice, right? So those are the 5 choices. So what I would do in a situation like this is work with the employee and say, okay, let's work through our 5 choices and coach that person around it to help them decide what they want to do. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Beautiful.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But another question I have, a couple of years ago when the Me Too movement started, there was a lot more attention on harassment in the workplace, primarily towards women, but also some men had complained about being harassed as well. That seems to have died down with so much else that's going on in the country.
Right.
But it hasn't gone away completely. I'm sure there are still plenty of situations where people feel they're being harassed because of their gender or race or orientation.
Yes.
And this is a very tricky situation for human resources because now you're starting to wade into legal waters and possibly having the state or even the federal government come in if it really is so egregious.
Yes.
How does a company react when they hear from one of their employees that there is alleged harassment going on?
Well, is the question, how do they or how should they? I
Well,
think is it.
well, I think there are 2 different answers from what
Correct.
set that up. Yes.
That is correct. So I clearly the should is they have to take this very seriously. And having worked in human resources for some time and in the learning and development and the people industry for my entire career, I have personally experienced this, any kind of bias, right? There's halo bias, there's size bias, there's affinity bias, there's racism, there's all of these different things. And a company has to take it seriously. And I'm going to say something I shouldn't. How a company could not take something like this seriously in the world in which we are living now is beyond me, but they have to. Now, a company, and now I'm talking more transactionally and legally, there has to be proof, right? So a company always has to take it seriously, and then they need to find out the data to be able to defend and prove, et cetera, et cetera. Within so the answer is clear. They need to respond and they need to do their due diligence to ensure that the accusation is real and take everyone seriously and believe them and work with respect. Now, the human who has brought that claim forward, it's a different part of your question, Phil, but I think there's value talking about it. Boy, you have to talk about those 5 choices that I mentioned because it's so hard. I have been in situations where some employees have shared details with me, but were terrified to bring it forth for fear of the consequence. Because with each of those 5 choices, there is a consequence. And they didn't want to fight the fight and make the change. They were terrified. They were scared. So the fear of the consequence of a company not taking you seriously, or the hard road, or have to prove the situation, I would hope for anyone listening, cannot be a deterrent for you to come forward to a company. You have to trust that they're going to listen and that they're going to do the right thing. It is going to be a hard, long road regardless.
Nobody likes to be told they're doing something wrong. In your business, how do you come into a client and tell them, hey, you're doing something wrong?
This is something I did wrong for a long time. And it takes practice, really, and takes courage, and it takes confidence to be able to do that. And as you're giving feedback in this situation, no, it's not you. This has nothing to do with you. And by giving feedback, it's actually a gift. For some leaders, it feels like conflict, right? So the first step is to know this is what I'm about to do is such a gift for the person who is receiving the feedback. The second piece is to set it up so delicately and with such respect, and sit the person down and say, can I help you understand why you're here? And it's for the benefit of you, X, Y, Z, and you set it up and you ask them for their feedback first. So you make them a participant in the conversation. And it could be something as simple as, so do you know why you're here? Well, I know I've been late to meetings quite a bit. Exactly. So I wanted to tell you about this. And you speak from the I perspective. I've noticed that. It's not, I've been told, because what happens in that case, my friend, is who said it? I want to talk about no. This is coming from me, right? And immediately gets to turn off into, well, I want to go talk. I knew Roger was going to say. It has nothing to do with anybody else. This is me. I've witnessed it. And the perception could be that you are lazy. The perception could be that you just can't prioritize. And who wants to hire somebody from the other department if they see you can't prioritize? So I'm here to help you. How can I ensure that you set your alarm 15 minutes early? What ideas can we come up with? So you make them a participant in their own solution. And then you hold them accountable at the end of the conversation. It's not easy. It's not easy, but with practice, it gets more fluid every single time.
Have you been in situations where clients hear everything that you've said and they just promptly ignore it or do the exact opposite?
Yeah, it's really annoying. I gotta tell you, that stinks.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, my friend, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And that's okay if that's the case. And I will say it that way as well. From my experience, and this, you asked me my opinion, I've given it. It depends on the tactic that you use. And I hate to use that word tactic, but if somebody flat out wants a consultant, which is an opinion, which is advice, then we can respond from a consultative perspective. If possible, we would prefer to respond with a coaching lilt, because coaching and consulting are such vastly different responses.
I assume now that most of your consulting work is being done virtually. Are you finding it easier to consult with people through the camera, or is it better to have a one-on-one rapport with somebody sitting in front of you?
We've always facilitated remotely. Most of the time we are face-to-face, and it's always preferred because of the human kinetic energy that just exists, not to get too metaphoric and whatnot, but there is something to be said for actual contact. However, to be able to coach and consult remotely is something that we've always done. It's just easier. And a lot of our clients prefer it because they don't have to welcome you and give you the coffee and they can just quick get on the box, boom, and we're right into it. So it has been pretty fluid for us, I have to say. It's a challenge from a facilitation perspective. So facilitation, consulting, coaching, all different methods. When we facilitate a workshop on bias or social selling, for example, that's a little bit more challenging because you still want people to be interactive. You want the somatic learning to happen. So you need people to actually, okay, gang, I need you to stand up, walk out of your bedroom right now. I want you to go and do 5 jumping jacks, come back here. And now I need you. So that takes a little bit more creativity. From a consulting perspective, it's been pretty fluid and people seem to be leaning into it, which has been great.
And that little beep that you just heard, that's my email. And if I was a rude person, I would be distracted from what you're saying to look at the email, or I would start to pick up my phone and start saying, "Oh, how do you?" Today it seems so many people have such limited attention spans. How do you work around that?
And you're not a rude person, but what an awesome transition into that question, my friend. You're a pro. Oh my goodness. So I myself am wildly distracted. There's a butterfly I just saw and I just caught my attention and off I went. And it runs in my family. It's just the human condition. And now this just makes it that much worse because you can't tell what people are doing. Well, guess what? You can't control this. You cannot put a finger in somebody's face and say, pay attention to it. It just won't work. It's called free will. If I could control that, that would be phenomenal. So what all you can do is, like I said earlier, is create an environment where people want to focus and where people want to learn and thrive. However, there is always that human condition. I think the statistic is 22 minutes. A human cannot maintain their focus on any one thing truly for more than 2 minutes. It's really challenging. And nowadays, in the world of TikTok, maybe 30 seconds. So you have to write for that and you have to prepare for that. It's like working in a service-oriented job, like at the DMV, and then somebody coming up to your window not having all the paperwork prepared. It's insanity. You have to prepare for that because that customer, it's just that person's coming. He or she is coming. So you have to prepare for the distraction. And again, this comes back to the 5 choices. Am I going to accept this? Am I going to just let this piss me off because this person can't focus on what I'm saying? Nope. You have to create interactive activities. You have to be centered beforehand, right? And understand and get people to want to get back to focus. And I'll leave it with this. You can't schedule anything like this for very long. People just won't stick around. So you just have to be smart and creative in how you script any remote interaction.
Well, for the folks out there who have stuck around, we're at the end of this episode. But Tina, if people wanted to continue the conversation with you, how can they get in touch with you?
You can either reach out via email, tina.clements@rpc-partners.com, or you can go to our website at rpcamerica.com, and I would love to hear from you.
Tina Clements, thanks so much for being a guest on today's episode.
Thank you very much.
Very good. And folks, we'll see you again next week. Have yourselves a good one.